Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Integrate Yourself. We're your hosts, Allison Pillow and Maya Gottlieb. You can find me, Allison, at pureenergypdx.com, and you can find Maya at mayagottlieb.com. Today, we are here with a special guest and a dear friend of ours, Andrew Johnston. He is a native Atlantan. We've had him on the show before. I will go ahead and note on the podcast notes his other show, which was way back, and I have to find the number because it was one of the first 20 episodes we had in there, and he talked a lot about breathing. The focus of the show was more on breathing, but today we're going to bring light to some other subjects in the nutrition world, as well as he's going to talk to everybody about what the practice of ELDOA and what that is and how it helps with connective tissue function, as well as mobility and all of that great stuff. So welcome, Andrew, to the show. We really, really are so glad that you came back and you decided to come back.
No, I'm happy to come back. I've done something right, so I appreciate you inviting me.
Yeah, well, if you wouldn't mind, just in case some of our listeners haven't listened to the first show that you were on, if you wouldn't mind just and letting everyone know just who you are, then we can get started from there. And I'd love to start talking about your book, your book about nutrition called Spot on Nutrition. I've just recently read it and it is amazing. It's really well done. I have to say, it's just so funny. It's so clever. Like, I was laughing through most of it just because, I mean, I guess because I'm a nutrition geek, but and I get a lot of the jokes, but it was just, I found it to be just so pleasant to read, and really, you didn't really miss anything in the book. Everything's covered. So I was really impressed.
Well, thanks. I mean, as you can imagine, writing on a subject like that is hard because you want to grant some level of authority, and yet you don't want to bore your readers to tears.
Definitely.
My background is I was an English major, and if you want to get really specific, I was a creative writing major. So I used that degree to no end whatsoever as a professional cyclist, which is what my first true job was. And then after my third concussion, I came into the field of sport and performance, and eventually wrote my first book, Holistic Strength Training for Triathlon, which is where I used that English degree. And I swore at that point I would never write another book. But because of the need for knowledge to get out there on various levels, including nutrition, obviously I decided to write a second book. And there are several others in the works, but the one that was most recently published, Spot on Nutrition. And I tried to make it, for lack of a better pun, digestible for most people. So I think hopefully they'll find it that way.
Yeah, that's a very good way to put it, because you're going to see more of those kinds of puns in that book for sure. And one thing that I didn't know about you, Andrew, is that you had worked with Dodie Anderson. Is that right?
Yeah, she was. So back in 2012, and actually it's probably 2011, I was watching a Tour de France video or something with my son. And he said, "Daddy, did you used to do that in, bike race?" I was like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Boy, I'd really like it to see that." I was like, "Oh, done." So I asked my wife, who I have to ask her permission for almost anything, if I could return to racing after about 4 or 5 years. She said, okay. And my goal was to win the Ironman. And I figured if I could win the Ironman, I could then walk away from the sport and then become a dad again, back to dad. But I knew that I was up against all odds, so I wanted to get everything working in my favor. And so a guy named Dan Hellman, who's another buddy of mine and friend, said, "Look, you need to call this woman Dodie, and she can probably take you to that next level." And through Dodie, I discovered Ray Peat, and then started just kind of going down that rabbit hole. And then it did the experimentation on myself. And I really think one of the reasons I was able to win the Ironman at the age of 40 was because of my nutrition and actually getting cells fueled that they need when they're under load. So that's how I met Dodie. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah.
And how was working with her?
She should have written the book. She can take a subject at such a high level, and wherever you are, meet you there. And trust me, she was up here and I was down here, so she brought it down to my level. And then each time we met once a week for, a couple of years maybe. And just talked for an hour and would discuss everything from my clients to myself, of course, And she just took me to that next level and beyond.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I can't
Yeah.
thank her enough.
Isn't she, and she's like a legend. I've never met her actually, but I've heard a lot about her. And she's in her 70s, is that correct? Or
I,
do you
I
know?
think she may be in her 80s now. I'm not
80s.
positive, and
Okay.
I don't want to
Yeah.
insult her, but either way, she's a sharp lady.
Do
Yeah.
you want to give our listeners a background of who she is, just real quick one?
Yeah.
I mean, I think Dodie is a contemporary of Ray Peat, so I think your listeners know Ray Peat. They've done a lot of brainstorming with each other. She's also the person who was doing, I guess you could call it like the metabolic typing diet, if you will, at first.
Okay.
Took it to the nth degree of levels, and she then finally kind of got out of that and started just doing one-on-one consulting because she felt like she could reach people better that way. And that's how I kind of met her, as opposed to doing some of the programs that were being taught.
I see. Cool.
Yeah, so that was part of your inspiration for writing the book, because as we all know, when we're talking about performance, when we're talking about getting better in the gym and aesthetically changing our body, it all relates to nutrition. It has to be in the mix. It has to be talked about. But what I loved about your book was that you really dispelled just about every myth, every nutrition myth out there, and all the dogma that's currently out there as well. One being serotonin, and I really wanted to talk about that today because that seems to be a big thing. A lot of nutrition experts and people that are that would be considered influencers in our industry are talking about serotonin as being a good thing for to be producing. It's not that it's bad, it's just that overproduction of it, since most of it's produced in the gut, is not a good thing. And I don't know, I would love for you to expand on that, because you did have a part in your book where you talked about that.
Yeah, and I didn't focus on serotonin, obviously, because there are too many rabbit holes you could go down and when you're talking
Sure.
about nutrition. But I had to speak to it because, obviously, as you said, it's a very hot topic in the industry at this point. I will say that the misinformation out there is usually what we do, at least in America, and we say, oh, this little bit of something does something good, so a lot of that something must do a lot of good, and that's
Right.
typically not the case. So serotonin is as we all know, is 90% of it is produced in the gut, and it can be triggered by lots of different things, but it's actually what Ray refers to as a stress hormone. And it's okay to be produced, but just like any other stress hormone, it's not need to be produced in excess or chronically, etc. So when you start calling it the happy hormone, and it's something that you want to produce all the time to change your mood, etc., that's a bunch of bunk. And there's really plenty of science behind what my view, if you will, for people that are willing to look at it. And if you just look at how the body works, I think it becomes common sense as well. I mean, one of the things that it's doing is it's triggering peristalsis, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, one of the reasons peristalsis is triggered at all because the body's trying to get rid of something that perhaps doesn't need to be in there. So I don't think we need to willy-nilly continue to stimulate that, because there comes a cost for that, and that's what most people don't understand, whether it be cortisol or serotonin or whatever. There's a cost for the production of anything, and it's not always a price that you want to pay.
Right.
Right.
With all the serotonin comes inflammation. And so if inflammation is increasing, there is less of that body to be able to stop producing it. So then maybe when parts of people don't understand is that when your serotonin increases, the conversion is supposed to be the pineal gland, right, into melatonin. And I think what happens is people don't recognize how much stress happens when at night, and you're already converting a lot of serotonin to melatonin. And if you're taking more melatonin, you're actually telling the body you're not making enough, so which increases more stress, increases more inflammation.
Yeah.
So that's a big issue I've heard, and a lot of people is I have sleeping issues, and then melatonin is supposed to be the helper of that, but it's actually counterintuitive to what the body needs.
Exactly. And in fact, that's kind of the whole idea behind Spot On, because Spot On is supposed to be one of 6 titles. You got Spot On Thoughts, Spot On Breathing, etc. Spot On Nutrition was the first one I wrote or published. And basically what it is that health is never found at the extremes. You know, it's right on the money. And yet the more you stay in that centered area, the bigger your margin of error becomes. But most of us are trying to go to one extreme or the other. And so, I mean, I can go without food, you know, for a certain amount of time, but if I do it long enough, I'm dead. I can go without breath, but if I do it long enough, I'm dead. I can run, and I can run a marathon, but if I keep running for the rest of my life, eventually I'm dead. And so my goal with writing this book and just to get people in the context of serotonin is to look at it that maybe too little's a problem, but too much is also a problem. So you need to find what works best for you and your physiology, which changes from moment to moment.
Right. And I guess back to what we always been talking about is, you know, the health of the thyroid and health of the liver, and why it's so important to not be taking something that's actually increasing something that's going to lower your function of those two things. Because the example of high serotonin is that the body is actually using more of the stress hormones versus producing the healthier hormones that are keeping your longevity, keeping your thyroid from overproducing or underproducing, and keeping your storage of your liver functioning.
Right. And I would say, instead of, you know, treating the symptom, instead of covering up with a Band-Aid, etc., why not look at the underlying cause of why the body is not producing or overproducing any particular substance, and let's just try to get it back to homeostasis, because that's where balance is found. That's where health is.
Right.
Sure.
Yeah, and that all relates to connective tissue and the health of your connective tissue too. And a lot of times people will try all these extreme measures to recover from working out, or they'll either go too hard and without replacing the energy to recover from it. And that's also another issue. But with that, certain types of movements are good for recovery for the connective tissue too. And you specialize in one of those, which is called ELDOA. And can you explain to everybody what exactly that stands for? Because I know it stands for something that I can't remember. And yeah. And like who brought this to the States, and as well as like what you've learned from learning that yourself and teaching others.
Yeah, so ELDOA is a French acronym. It translates into English as LOADS, which is longitudinal, osteoarticular, decapitation, stretching. And it's a mouthful for sure. A guy named Guy Voyer, this was his doctoral thesis, and I think it was back in the 70s. So it's really not new at all. It's just only now getting popularized, and he's actually now recently trademarked it, and now he's starting to teach and license practitioners in the world. And I was one of maybe 25 of his first graduates, and now I think there's been a second 15 or 12 graduates, etc. So they're like somewhere around 40 or so in the world. And it's dealing with the concepts of basically everybody uses the catchword fascia at this point, but he is truly a master of everything fascia. Fascia, however you want to pronounce it. I could barely understand the word he was saying the first 36 hours I was working with him. He has a thick French accent, which either his accent has gotten better or my ear has gotten better. But literally, I remember thinking I just wasted my money because I didn't understand a word he was saying, and he was talking such high-level anatomy. And in fact, y'all know I've trained under Paul Chek since 2001, and I love the man, and think I didn't think I'd ever meet a man who knew the body at such a high level, at such an intimate level, until I met Guy. And Guy takes it up a notch. It's pretty impressive. But you could ask me some specifics about ELDOA and how I use it, but it's everybody who wants to know why Tiger Woods just won his first championship in 5 years after 4 back surgeries, because of ELDOA.
Wow.
Wow, that's significant.
I did not know that. That's awesome.
Maybe you can tell them.
One of my buddies works with him. I can't say
okay.
who, but anyways.
Gotcha.
So maybe what you could actually talk about is something simple for most people. Like, what's the difference between foam rolling and ELDOA?
It's a good
Okay.
one.
All right. So I forget what the podcast is called, but a guy named Dan Hellman, again, one of my buddies, he's the person who actually introduced me to Guy, wrote or did a video blog or something about the difference between foam rolling and ELDOA. And one of the main takeaways I would say is that the fascia is filled with what are called microtubules. And if you look at the word tube, it means it's hollow and there's something in that. What's in that? All the fluids you need for health. But if you're taking the fascia and then compressing it via, a foam roller or a Graston technique or something along those lines, even if it feels therapeutic, it is quite feasible that you're doing damage unless your knowledge of anatomy is so exquisite that you're doing exactly what you need to do. So I would say the foam roller, if it's working for you, it's a shotgun approach to treating the fascia, whereas ELDOA can be truly precision-based, surgically focusing on one specific area depending on what your goal is.
So if we took those tubes as the foam roller is being like utilized, you're maybe crushing parts of those tubules. Are you doing as much as you think you're doing? What would be the difference of those holds in the specific positions versus someone just taking a foam roller and like really just pressuring on those tubules?
Well, again, I would say some of it's compression with the foam roller versus elongation and opening with the ELDOA. And then also one is passive, relatively speaking, and one is active. The ELDOA is active. And if you think about how most people learn best and how the body learns best, it learns best actively. So the analogy I like to use is if I'm trying to teach you how to ride the bicycle, but I put on training wheels and I hold onto your saddle and I never let go, you're not going to learn a thing about balance. So get on the foam roller or even the inversion table and hang from it and let gravity supposedly open up your space. Well, maybe you do something, maybe. But if you're doing it actively, your body truly learns what that position is and you're strengthening yourself. So the term ELDOA has stretch in there, but don't let that fool you. You're actually strengthening yourself in that position so you get stronger with the vertebra apart as opposed to compressed, if that makes sense.
I would assume it also has to do with the nervous system being active versus not being passive when the nervous system goes into a more parasympathetic state. And that would have to influence how the flow of those tubules work while you're doing something that is strengthening.
Exactly. I mean, and they're finding out too now that the fascia itself, they're calling a, the new organ. Well, it's been around for a long time, so it's only been discovered recently, but there's nothing new about it. And all the ELDOAs, because you have ganglion in front of, you're in the spine, okay? Each one of these ELDOAs that acts on the spine is actively working on the ganglion as well, which means you're balancing or bringing into balance the autonomic nervous system as well. So some people might do ELDOA for back pain, and all of a sudden they feel, wow, my headaches went away, or my digestion got better, or my menstrual pain dissipated, etc., because it has a complete autonomic nervous system impact on the body.
So what it sounds like is that it calms the nervous system, especially for people who are just like, is that what you're saying with
I would say it balances the nervous system.
Okay.
And again, it's everything, like being too parasympathetic, I would say is just as bad as being sympathetic,
Yes.
right? So
Yeah, let's talk about that, because I remember a time, and I was actually using ELDOA a lot at one point, and I think I did become too parasympathetic, and my back, I started having issues with my back because of that, because I wasn't doing enough strengthening or quicker movements to train my nervous system that way. And I think this happens a lot with people who are doing a lot of yoga and a lot of meditation, right? And possibly, maybe Pilates even, or things where you're having to do a lot of isometric holding.
yeah, well, I would say, I actually like to say, if you're going to yin, you got to yang.
Yeah, yeah.
So you need a little bit of everything. It's finding that balance, and that balance is different from person to person, even from moment to moment in the same person.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, and because everything is a tool to help, and everything can be a tool to hurt based on how often and what
Right.
your goals are. And the ELDOA seems to be very helpful for people who maybe, have done certain type of stretching or done foam rolling or done something and still haven't seen a lot of results. Whereas you're saying it takes it just to a different level of strengthening while isometric holding.
Yeah, and we can put it at a certain level for the listeners to make it a little bit more easily understandable. But I don't want people to think that uh, it's as simplistic as it sounds. It's actually very specific, which is both the strength and the weakness of it. Because the strength of it being, it is so very effective when applied appropriately by the right practitioner with the right person, etc. And yet, because of that, trying to do so on your own without somebody putting their hands on you and watching you and getting you to be in the right position until you develop the cortical map of what that right position is can be a bit of a challenge and maybe even frustrating at times. But I would say that the ELDOAs in general are not going to be contraindicated for anyone. It's just certain ones need to be applied at certain times. Certain ones need to be taught in what are called factors of progression until the person is able to do the true full ELDOA. But it's hard to hurt yourself with this type of stuff unless you're doing it completely incorrectly and overzealous and very mechanical as opposed to fluid.
Yeah. I agree because, and that's what I learned from it. I think, like you said, it would be really helpful to have someone guide you through the process to help you figure out what's going on. I think if you just jump right into it, you might hit some road bumps. I know what I found, it opened me up pretty quick. And then in areas that might not have been ready to open up yet, in my lower back that had been injured. And I just didn't realize that there was so much restriction there. And so I learned a little bit of through the hard way, but I learned it eventually.
Yeah, yeah.
But it's that effective. It happens so quick, and I love it because it really does, like you said, helps you strengthen, but also elongates, but it stays elongated. It doesn't go back like as if you were doing a foam roller or something, or stretching, just normal passive stretching.
Right. Well, you're taking the tissue, and what I like to say, you're normalizing the tissue. And it's said, if you exercise, you then have to normalize. And everything that we do, like I love to ride a bike, but at the level at which I have done it is not very healthy, not only from a muscular system, but a hormonal system and otherwise. But the ELDOA can truly treat all that if it's done appropriately, and it needs to be
Right.
done appropriately. Like immediately after exercise is when I'll do it, and then I'll do it shortly before bed as well, because that's when the body's going to go through most of its healing anyways.
And plus, with the stuff that we've already just talking about your book, on top of that, you're actually helping CO2 production. You're actually helping the fascia and the all the ligaments and tendons and everything to become very much activated and releasing and helping itself, the cells and stuff like that, move even stronger through having that all together, right?
Exactly. And if you think about it, truly everything is fascia. So treating the whole system is ultimately only where health is going to be found. If we start to isolate and compartmentalize and think about this piece or that piece without thinking about how it works with another. And I think that's kind of where we've gone wrong with conventional medicine, et cetera. We don't realize that by treating one thing, we're affecting 30, 50, 100 other things that we're not even contemplating. So addressing the fascia is definitely an important component to health for sure.
Yeah, I agree. I think sometimes we end up creating other problems when we go at it, in the way of like trying to solve one issue and not linking it with more holistically in how the body works. So
Yeah, I have a lot of people come to me for an orthopedic reason or for whatever reason, and they're kind of surprised when I look at what they ate, or how they slept, etc. But as I say all the time, the MRI can tell you you've got a disc herniation at, L4-5, but it can't tell you that you had a fight with your spouse last night,
Yeah.
that you had a crappy night's sleep, that you ate something that just destroyed your gut, etc. And this all adds up, and truly that ends up being the difference between whether a person's in pain or not.
Yeah.
You can have something that's completely out of place, but it doesn't hurt until you don't drink enough water, for example.
Yeah. Your stress bucket just gets over
Too.
full. And stress is stress. People don't realize that it can be many, many things. Exercise, of course, can be a stress if it's done too much. And, you can have digestive distress that can be very stressful, like especially, even just your occasional drink of wine can for sometimes cause people enough digestive distress to create, fascial issues or back issues, back pain. So,
Well, I mean, and you kind of bring it up, or you got me at least to think about it. So when I'm doing my classes, and the classes are not easy. I mean, you might squat 8, 10, 12 reps or whatever, but when you're doing some of these holds, they're basically at your max. So we'll call it a 1 RM max. So you're working very hard at a very high level. And a lot of people, when they are stressed like that, they do one of two things. They either breathe very quickly and very shallowly, or they hold their breath, both of which are counterproductive to normalizing the fascia, which will actually start to, we can call it constrict, for lack of a better term, rather than normalize. And so I'm truly trying to get my clients and my class, when I'm working with a class, I want to hear their breath, and I want to hear it deep, and I want to hear it strong and loud, and allow the tissue to do what it can do with the right stimulus.
that's
That's
great.
cool.
Yeah.
So can you tell, I mean, besides, you just a little bit told about the class and how it works, but maybe kind of give a representation of what will happen when you come into your place, and how that kind of works, and in a way that they can kind of see that this is something that's easy to do, like you said, but in a way where you're being guided, and you're not going to be lost in how you're doing it. You're just going to kind of, find that you can adapt to certain things, and you'll break it down to make it simpler for people if they can't get into certain other positions.
Yeah. So I had a class and I'm calling it a general ELDOA class, so that there's different levels. And the cool thing about an ELDOA is that the only piece of equipment that you need is your body,
Mhm.
right? And so I did a class yesterday, and all my Sunday classes have been selling out. So I've started to add a second Tuesday noon class, Wednesday 6 p.m. class. But in that class, I had wide ranges of ability, including a woman who was the first woman ever to do what's called the Epic 5, which is when you do 5 Ironmans in 5 days on the 5 islands of Hawaii. I
Oh,
mean, she's the
wow.
first woman ever.
Mm.
And in that same class, I had my mom. And my mom is 73 years old, and I love my mom. But just to show you the difference in mobility, now my mom she's awesome now. Ever since I got leukemia, she cleaned up her act. She exercises every day, weights 3 days a week, walks, etc. So she's awesome. But I gave her a big shout out. So I was like, hey, class, if you don't like the class, you can blame my mom, because she's the reason I'm here. And then if you love the class, you can give all the credit to my mom, because she's the reason I'm here. But it was also her first class, whereas I've had plenty of people in that class take every class I've done. And so the level of ability was night and day. So we get those factors of progression. And I tell them, we work at your max, which is different than Maya's max, Allison's max, my max, etc. So you tailor it to your individual abilities and needs, which again might change from day to day depending on what you're doing to your body. This is a long-winded answer. I opened my studio about a month ago, and I went 9 days without strength work, swim, bike, or run. That's probably the first time since I've been crawling that I haven't done something. And it's just because I was just too busy. But, the one thing I did do was ELDOA.
I knew you were going to say that.
I need it.
Yeah, no, I believe it. I believe it. It is fantastic. There's so much that's going on there that I don't think even I understand, but it's an incredible tool for recovery, but just also just keeping keeping you moving in a very functional and at a high level of performance as well. Just
Yeah, so it's not just about pain, and admittedly, a lot of the
yeah,
people that are coming to me these days are for coming to me because they've been referred out from a pain perspective. But I have a lot of other clients coming to me for performance reasons, and so I've got one PGA champion myself. I've got some world champions in cycling and triathlon, and I even have a guy who's won the Giro d'Italia, and ELDOA is part of that. So it's a definite performance enhancer.
So maybe one of the things that you can combine is, we laughed about this because you had talked about how you noticed a change in your height, and Ray has talked about the change also can happen when you start changing your diet away from PUFAs and everything, and that he also experienced a height change. But that is we laughed a lot in the class about it, but that is an actual a thing that happens to people as we get older, as we lose our height,
mm-hmm.
and it's small in increments of when we're getting older, but it is a true function of the cells themselves not having the strength, like you're saying, the tubules of the fascia, to be able to sustain you from going into flexion and becoming more overly flexed, or you losing your extensor tone. But I just thought that was a great example of why these ELDOA and Ray Pete's work and the stuff that comes from that works really well with helping performance athletes.
Yeah, I mean, nutritionally, it's all about the cell getting the fuel it needs to function. And there's only one
Yeah.
disease out there, and that's a cell that's not functioning the way a cell should. Whether it manifests as leukemia in my case, or diabetes in somebody else's case, it's a cell that's not functioning well. So we've got to give the cell what it needs to function like a cell should. And it's beyond nutrition, but nutrition is definitely a component of that. Also, it's of course all the way from thoughts to breath to hydration, etc. And then when you're looking at the ELDOA, you're actually addressing, like we said, the fascia, which means the entire body, and you're normalizing that tissue so that it becomes capable. Like when I'm working with cyclists, I tell them when we start working on their hips and doing the myofascial stretching and the ELDOAs, that it's going to give them 30 to 50 watts without doing anything to their heart and lungs, because the potential is there. They're just not able to access it because they're just blocked up, because the tissue is like a big piece of leather that's all dried out. And now we're going to normalize it and let it move the way it should.
Yeah, getting nutrients to the tissue now as
Exactly.
before you couldn't. That's
exactly.
amazing. And I will say that if you guys want to hear Andrew's story about leukemia, because we talked about that on the last show, you can go to episode 18 of Integrate Yourself and check it out. It was a great show. So I just want to put that out there because you mentioned you had leukemia, and if everybody wants to hear that story, they can go there. But you are a survivor. What's that?
I said leukemia, no big deal.
Right.
Yeah, right?
It's no big deal now, right? It's just one of those things. But yeah, and I think it's an amazing. You're just reminding me a lot about ELDOA, because I haven't, for some reason, I just stopped doing it for a while, and it's reminding me to get back to it. I have to do it when I come to Atlanta too. I'll take your class.
Yes, ma'am.
What's that?
Do you want to just tell them real quickly your schedule so that people?
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Well, you can sign. I have a sign up link on my website, www.triumphtraining.com, and it's on the very opening page. And the dates that are in bold are dates where the classes are available and still open, because my Sunday classes have been consistently selling out. My Tuesday class I just started, and my Wednesday class I haven't even done yet. So it starts tomorrow. So we'll see how they go. But yeah, please, if you're in town, I'd love to have you.
I would love to be there. And I was going to ask too, are you able to travel and teach? Are you able to come out to Portland? Do like a workshop or something? Or is that, I know they're really restrictive on who teaches it, right? And how they teach.
I'm certified to teach level 1 and level 2.
Oh, okay.
Level 3 and above, you need to have somebody like Scott Herrera or Guy Voyer himself. But I have yet to teach that because I've had too many other irons in the fire, including opening up this place. But
right. Well, let's get that on the books, because I want to get certified.
Well, and you can, but there are people that are actually closer than that.
Oh yeah, there's some people out here.
Yeah, for sure. West
Okay.
Coast bumper, man.
Okay. Well, I know they're in LA, but I don't want to go to LA.
Come to Atlanta.
All right. All
Okay.
right.
Okay.
He'll let you know when he's teaching. How's that?
Okay.
Yeah.
So okay, let's switch gears here. Let's see. I want to talk a little bit more about your book because I just thought it was so great. I mean, it wasn't like it wasn't like there was anything new that I didn't know about it, but it was a you just presented it in such a great way. I think for many people to understand very easily, but at the same time, you had what I loved about it is you had so many great scientific references to everything. It was all backed up. You didn't, like I said earlier, you didn't miss a beat. It was just everything was covered. So I really also want to bring up another myth about omega-3 fatty acids being healthy because I continue to hear that. And now we're hearing again that coconut oil is a poison, right? And I couldn't believe it when this came out
Yeah.
because it's just like they keep trying to get people to stop using coconut oil or they keep trying to convince people it's bad, and it's not working because there's so many studies out there that actually back it up that coconut oil is very healthy for you. Been used medicinally for thousands of years in many cultures. It's easy to express from the coconut because you just press it as opposed to like a seed or a nut or a seed mainly. You have to use it. You have to really get the oil out mechanically. You had some great research about it and maybe why people are continuing to tell people that fish oil is like really healthy for you. And as we know, it's not, and kind of what your experience is with that.
Well, I think most people are telling you it's healthy because that's what they've been told,
Mm-hmm.
or they're telling you it's healthy because they're selling it,
Right.
or they're telling you it's healthy because they've looked at the science for 3 months, but they haven't looked at the science for 3 years or whatever.
Yeah.
And look, lots of things can be healthy, but again, done to excess, done to the extreme, become perhaps not so healthy for you. And if you start studying lipid science and the true chemical makeup of these fats and oils, it starts to become pretty obvious that these polyunsaturated fatty acids are very unstable. They're very light sensitive. They're very heat sensitive. They're very reactive with oxygen, you know. And as a human, don't you like light? Don't you like warmth rather than cold? Don't you like oxygen rather than death? I mean, you can look at the science, but you can also look at the common sense. And then, I mean, ultimately, try it for yourself. The analogy that I give my clients, the story, and I don't know if I put this in the book or not, honestly, I used to eat 2 jars of peanut butter a week because peanut butter goes with everything, right? And I was having heel pain took me out of triathlon, and nobody could seem to fix. And I networked with some really smart, intelligent people, and I couldn't figure it out. And I'm not bad at what I do either. And I finally thought, well, maybe I'm having an allergic reaction to peanut butter. So I took the peanut butter out of my diet. 10 days later, maybe less, pain was gone, never to return. And I now know that it happens to be that the polyunsaturated fatty acids were perpetuating any inflammation that I was starting because of running, 25, 30, 35 miles a week, etc.
Right.
It's just try it for yourself. If it doesn't work, go back to your fish oil. I don't care. If it tastes good, go for it.
Well, I mean, I think what you did was really talk about why people are confused. They utilize the research to say, hey, it works to cut down inflammation in the beginning, but as the longevity goes on, the inflammation comes back and is even accelerated as you get into more issues of shutting down the liver. Like everything is what's going to help me right this moment. Like, oh yes, let me have this Band-Aid. But if you don't know the research or you don't know how to interpret research, you're still stuck in knowing that everything's specific for selling. It's not specific for helping people see what their trends are, how they are doing, and what it does in the long term.
Exactly. And I mean, to give a shout out to my book, I that's what I tried to put out there. If people would read the book, I think it's pretty much common sense. I'm not selling anything. I mean, I don't care. Don't buy it. Get it from your friend and read it, and just decide for yourself. But I put down a list in the book of optimal foods, of caution foods, and of avoid foods. And if you look at the caution list, it's a ton of stuff, mostly because, again, depending on your physiology, depending on Allison's physiology, depending on my physiology, maybe it's good, maybe it's bad. It's just, there's a lot of stuff that has been perpetuated as, hey, that's good, when maybe it's not. And there's been a lot of stuff that's been perpetuated as, hey, that's bad, like the saturated fat and coconut oil, when maybe it's not, especially if you dig deep enough. But you don't have to dig deep. I mean, my first page, the first chapter, how long was that chapter? It was 1 page long, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I just gave you all the rules. If you follow those rules and you don't want to go any deeper, you'll be fine.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's an attunement to what you know is your stress, like how you respond, how you recover, because stress is going to be here. You want it, you don't want it. It's depending on where your life is and what you're doing, that sometimes certain things will work and certain things won't.
Exactly. And everybody thinks stress is a bad, but without stress, there's no stimulus to evolve, adapt, etc. It's when the stress becomes beyond your level to adapt to it that it becomes detrimental on any level. And you need it on some level. Otherwise, you're not progressing, which means you're probably regressing.
Right.
Yes. Yes. So
Health
all
is
about
never static.
adaptive. What's that?
Health is never static.
Right.
That is a true statement. Well, thank you, Andrew. Can you share with everybody quickly, because I know you got to go, how to find you, as well as where to find your book, and how to sign up for your class if they're in Atlanta?
Yeah, so my website's triumphtraining.com. It is about to be updated with new pictures of my new
Ooh.
place. So they can definitely sign up for my ELDOA classes there. My book is also downloaded, can be downloaded on that site, or it'll take you to Amazon where you can get it. It's in a few bookstores in the Atlanta area. I don't know about anywhere else. And if you want to, you could follow me on Facebook, but I've been really slack there as of late because I've been just putting too much energy into my business because there's a lot going on right now.
I know, and it's so exciting, and I'm excited for you, Andrew. So thank you for taking the time to talk to us today and share your wisdom.
Yeah. Thanks, Andrew.
Yeah.
It was my pleasure.
It's
And
great to
Maya, I want
connect.
you to class again soon. And Allison, anytime you're in town, please come.
All right. Sounds good. All
Bye,
right.
guys. See ya.
Bye.